Yep.
We are recording, folks. Okay, just to let everybody know. So, good afternoon. Welcome to Aging Together's Noontime series. So glad that you are here with us. We had an overwhelming response to this presentation today with over 70 people that signed up. I don't know if everyone's going to be able to actually join, but we are recording. My name is Ellen Phipps. For those of you who may not know me, I am the executive director of Aging Together. And Aging Together connects people to resources and communities to improve quality of life as we age. And a lot of our educational presentations and networking groups all have to do with helping people to age in place as long as possible. For more information about our upcoming programs or about Aging Together, please visit us on our website at agingtogether.org. And you can also download the most recent version of the regional resource guide for older adults for our 5 county area, which includes Culpeper, Madison, Orange, Rappahannock, and Fauquier counties. So today I'm really excited to introduce our friends from the Panorama Natural Burial. This is Stephanie Bonney and Ryan Grant. I'll let them tell you a little bit about themselves as much as they'd like to do that. But in the interest of time, I know we have a hard stop today at 1 o'clock. We're going to have the presentation, and please feel free to ask questions. And if you're not comfortable asking, or if you prefer to put them in the chat, go ahead and put your question in the chat, and we'll make sure we get the questions addressed to Stephanie and Ryan. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you all for hosting us today. As Ellen said, my name is Stephanie Bonney, and I'm the general manager of Panorama Natural Burial in Earlysville. And on the line with me today is our assistant manager, Ryan Grant, who handles much of our environmental restoration and land conservation efforts. So the goal of our presentation is to provide you with some basic information on natural burial and how we do things specifically at Panorama Natural Burial. There should be more than enough time at the end for questions. So getting started. Oh, my slides don't want to advance. That's so weird.
Are you
It's
are
so
you clicking
weird.
on it? Are
I
you clicking
am.
or
I am. It's so weird. Okay, let me see. There we go. I
okay.
had to use my mouse. That's odd. It's never happened before. Anyway, okay. Take two. Um, First and foremost, so let's talk briefly about disposition in the United States. Although it seems like a new type of disposition emerges weekly, looking at use-based burial, burial in the ground and cremation are the two most common disposition methods in our country. Burial was fairly standard in the US until the 1980s when cremation began to increase in popularity. And as of last year, approximately 60% of the US is choosing cremation. However, for the first time since the 80s, experts believe that the cremation rate is beginning to level off. When discussing burial, it's helpful to understand that there are two primary types of burial grounds in our country. Both varieties come with their own set of rules and requirements for those buried on site, which we will discuss shortly. For most of us, the term burial has been used to describe interment in what is known as conventional or traditional cemeteries, pictured here. You can't go far without seeing one, and in fact, as of today, there are over 20,000 registered cemeteries in the United States. Now onto the other type of burial, known as natural or green burial, pictured here. And while many argue natural burial should actually be referred to as traditional burial, the current wave of green burial popularity has been on the rise since the first green burial cemetery, Ramsey Creek Preserve, opened in 1998. And these are some photos of some services at Panorama. These days, cemeteries really do come in all shapes and sizes. So it's important to note that while not the norm, there are also some conventional cemeteries establishing natural burial sections in order to offer green burial as an option as it continues to increase in popularity. These spaces are referred to as hybrid cemeteries. There aren't any hybrid cemeteries in the Charlottesville area, but worth mentioning. And then for the purposes of this presentation, let's assume we're focusing primarily on cemeteries that only handle natural burials. What is natural burial? What exactly are these cemeteries looking for? Natural burial gets its name from the idea that burial should be as simple and as environmentally agreeable as possible. That means everything going into the ground, from clothing to the casket or burial shroud, is biodegradable. No concrete burial vaults, metal caskets, or embalming fluids are permitted, and bodies return to the earth in a way that sustains and promotes life. With cemeteries being treated as protected spaces by local and state laws, it only makes sense that land preservation is often at the heart of many natural cemeteries. The land in these natural cemeteries is only gently rather than meticulously maintained. Use of mechanical equipment and herbicides are at a bare minimum. The heart of the mission is to utilize the land in a respectful manner that benefits all. So why go green? This slide sort of piggybacks on what we were just talking about. Going green is a simple return to the earth, feeding the earth to promote new life. Burial in nature provides a peaceful setting for reflection for those who remain, and these spaces also serve as a way to help conserve land in many cases. Quick note on greenwashing. So much like the term organic, the term green is one to be skeptical of. As with anything claiming to be environmentally friendly, it's important to carefully evaluate natural burial products. Are they made of genuine materials? Are they locally sourced when possible to reduce the carbon footprint? Who is making them, and are they being paid and treated fairly? Ultimately, a green burial is only as green as the sum of its parts. And here we have a quick visual representation of how green burial cemetery numbers have increased since 2015. Focus on the green bars at the center, which represent the US only growth rate. And these numbers include cemeteries that are both exclusively green burial and those that operate as hybrids. So we're definitely on the incline. And where can I get one? Picture is more relevant in the fall, but still gets the idea across. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to talk a bit more specifically about panorama natural burial.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, so as we just saw, approximately 400 US cemeteries either have natural burial sections or are uniquely dedicated to natural burials. And this number continues to grow each year. As of right now, there are 4 other natural burial cemeteries in Virginia, and these include Duck Run in Harrisonburg, Cool Springs at Holy Cross Abbey in Berryville, Forest Rest in Boone's Mill, and the Meadow in Lexington. But Panorama Natural Burial is the first natural burial cemetery in the Charlottesville area and is located in Earlysville. So we're Panorama Natural Burial because we're on Panorama Farms. And what exactly is Panorama Farms? Here's a brief history. Jim and Bunny Murray moved to Earlysville from New York in 1952, and they settled on an expansive 850-acre parcel of land that they would farm on into the 1990s. And then, seeing the writing on the wall for many small family farms, they made a conscious and successful effort to shift the farm from agriculture to community-minded businesses that would serve to protect the land while focusing on sustainability. And the goal was to keep the land open and to invite the community in, and they passed their values down to their sons, who worked tirelessly to uphold their parents' legacy. So currently, there are 3 businesses on Panorama Farms. One is Panorama Pay Dirt, a composting soil company. Another is Panorama Running, home to UVA and Albemarle High School cross-country teams. And now the third business is Panorama Natural Burial. And although all of the businesses are under the Panorama Farms name, they each operate completely independently, with Natural Burial being located on the opposite side of the property from the other 2 businesses. Okay, so why choose Panorama Natural Burial? There are a few things that truly make us stand out among the other green burial cemeteries in Virginia. First of all, we know that with death, so many of us need more than a quiet cemetery. In addition to our beautiful natural landscape, we host numerous activities to enrich the lives of those within our community. From native plant identification walks to yoga, we are demonstrating that cemeteries can be a place full of life and meaningful connection. We hope to be a place where positive memories are made. And additionally, Panorama is the only conservation natural burial cemetery in Virginia. So, a bit more about conservation and restoration. Much of Panorama Farms was left to its own devices since agricultural use stopped in the 1990s. This means that many undesirable invasive plants started to take over, limiting biodiversity. But in the last 2 years, efforts have been made to remove invasive species from the burial ground and replace them with native plants. Lots of grasses, wildflowers, shrubs, and trees. We also practice delayed mowing and hopefully prescribed burns to help restore the meadow by limiting invasive plant growth and promoting native growth and germination. We've installed bluebird and kestrel boxes for shelter and hopefully bat boxes in the near future. And all of this is an effort to create a more balanced ecosystem. And the final thing that we are doing differently is promoting the idea that knowledge is power. We are the only cemetery focusing on education about end of life and death care options. We never want people to feel pressured into making one of the most important decisions of their lives. And while we think natural burial is the gentlest ending, we want to empower families to investigate their options and make informed choices they are happy with. So, with this in mind, we teamed up with a couple of other organizations to create this website for Virginia specific end of life information. And on this site, you can find everything from how to work with or avoid working with a funeral home to creating a home funeral and natural burial ceremony. And a quick fun fact, we are also one of only 12 cemeteries in the country to be members of the Conservation Burial Alliance. Membership with the Conservation Burial Alliance means that our cemetery is dedicated to the conservation of the land in Earlysville, and that we pledge to actively educate the community while seeking out new ways to steward the land.
That's pretty much it for our presentation. I can probably
Great.
stop
Um,
sharing.
Yeah, if you want to stop the share, we can
Yeah.
get into a little conversation. Before we open, first of all, thank you both. That was very informative. Um, Before we open it up to everybody, I did just want to mention too that or maybe ask Stephanie, I know when we first spoke a while back, you talked about some assumptions that people make about where people can be buried and cannot be buried. And that was kind of an eye opener for me. So I don't know, would you mind talking a little bit about like, I think the options for being buried on people's private property or other options or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody's asking what is natural burial. Maybe we should start there real quick.
Okay. Yep. Maybe they missed the first couple of slides.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I hope I
Okay.
did that.
Okay. But
So,
go ahead and start there. I think that's
yeah,
great.
yeah. So natural burial is the same as green burial. They can be used interchangeably. Ultimately, what it means is everything going into the soil is meant to feed the soil. So there's no metal casket, no embalming fluid, no concrete burial vault. The idea is, again, everything is just going to break down very gently into the soil. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
And
Ellen,
then there's another question. What is the general price for a natural burial?
sure. Natural burial at Panorama ranges, the spaces range from $4,000 to $6,000. That's based on where you choose to be buried in the cemetery. If you're pre-planning, you can do 10% down with no interest and make payments over the course of a year. Because while we recognize, you know, burial at Panorama is significantly more affordable than an average cemetery in our area, it's still a significant expense. So plenty of families take us up on that option. And that's all on the website. We're really transparent. We don't put it in the presentation specifically because we've been asked to present at various facilities, and some people want us to focus on more of what natural burial is. They don't want it to feel like marketing at all. So that's
Right.
not an effort at all to like conceal anything. We just don't like step on any toes. So
No,
great
that's
for the
good, but that's good
question.
to know that it's on the website.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so as part of that, in the chat, how pressing is it to buy a plot in advance? And then how quickly after death does a natural burial need to take place?
So it's not pressing in terms like from my standpoint. It's we have plenty of people that don't make arrangements ahead of time and then family members call at the time of need. I would say, when considering different, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, can everybody
Yeah.
make sure if you're not asking a question, can you be sure you're on mute? Sorry, I meant to say that at the beginning.
So
Okay.
in considering all that goes on when somebody dies, I recommend planning ahead. It takes a lot off of people's plates in the moment. It's fairly easy to come out, get a tour, choose a space and do the paperwork. But in the moment, it's just another task that has to be completed. And it's something that, I think a lot of people are trying to be as considerate as possible of their loved ones and kind of, making an effort to kind of clear the way for them to just feel whatever they need to feel. But like I said, from my perspective, I mean, it's totally up to the individual as far as how they want to handle it.
So I
there-
guess the other part of that question, I guess, was so let's say a person dies, and then how much time do they have from that time of death before they need to get buried in a natural way, I guess.
there's really there's
No.
no time frame. I will say we just need 48 hours notice. So that's, if you're looking for a quick turnaround, we can do something within 2 days. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's no limit on how long somebody can stay at home or be with the funeral home. We had one of our first burials, the gentleman died in January and wasn't buried until April. So
Wow.
people had to come in from out of town, things that had to align. So that was totally fine. So it's pretty.
Okay. Well, we have a question about what about metal teeth or jewelry?
That's fine. We do ask people to stick to organic, natural materials. I'm not the organic police. I'm not checking tags. I'm not not doing anything like that. We think our families are doing their best. Jewelry, wedding bands, things like that. I mean, it's kind of, I'm not testing metals. So it's sort of up to the families to do the right thing. And we feel like our families are really already going out of their way to take such a major step in the right direction for our environment. So yeah, compliance is encouraged. Yeah.
I think another thing, before I get back to the chat, there are a lot of questions. We'll get back to that in a minute. But if you could speak to a minute, this is another thing that I learned when I first spoke with you. A lot of people, I think, assume that, cremation is an alternate way for burial for the environment, but that's not necessarily the case. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. And I realized I never somebody had asked about teeth.
Sorry.
Artificial joint replacement type things, teeth. We don't have to worry about having any of that removed. The only things that we ask be removed are pacemakers and defibrillators, anything that's got like a battery in it, and that's something that a funeral home can do pretty easily. So, um, yeah, you don't have to have your hip taken out to be buried at Panorama. But yeah, Ellen, that's a great question about cremation. And Ryan, I feel bad you're just sitting there. Um, do you want to take this one to talk a little bit about cremation?
Yeah, sure. So, for the last few decades, cremation has been marketed as a more environmental alternative to traditional burial. And in some cases, that may be true because a traditional burial involves an awful lot of concrete and a metal casket or embalming fluid, which contains formaldehyde. So, in that sense, cremation may at times be better than a traditional burial. But cremation also involves a very large fuel use in order to combust the body. And it also releases a large amount of greenhouse gases in the process. And even after the fact, after the actual cremation process, the what are called cremains, the ashes, are a very high pH. And so when those enter the soil, it causes most plants to react very negatively. So cremated burial actually creates more problems for the environment for years after the fact because nothing can grow on top of the cremains.
Wow, thank you. I think that's very interesting
Yeah.
for sure. We have another question here. What is the process of handling the body? And we talked about time limit, but also if someone wants to donate organs.
That's really not a problem. In terms of handling the body, Virginia is a state where you are within your legal rights to keep somebody at home. You don't have to call a funeral home.
Joel, I'm on a Zoom session and she just came.
Oops, let's see if we can mute that person there. Okay.
um,
Yeah.
so the body has to arrive to Panorama in either a shroud or a basket or a box. We don't come into contact with the body in any way. You can do that. A funeral home can do that, a combination of both. You know, we've been fortunate. There are several funeral homes in the area that are more than happy to work with the family and allow the family to do as much or as little as they want. The only time you're really not going to run into that is if you're working with a corporate funeral home. They don't have a lot of flexibility, unfortunately. But there was another part of that question, Ellen. Handling the body and then
Oh, if they want to donate organs.
oh yeah. Typically that is something that has to take place in a sterile environment. So you can, in my experience, I used to work in a funeral home. In my experience, they can harvest things in a prep room in some cases, I think. So at a funeral home. In other cases, they may transport you to the hospital if you're not at the hospital to do it to harvest organs. But then after that, it's the same as any other service. Yeah, there's no problem there at all. You just have to kind of connect the dots ahead of time, I think. Depending on, if you know you want to be an organ donor, is setting that up ahead of time. So.
Okay. And then, thank you. Um, Another question here from Jennifer. What does the cost include and what is the process compared to more common processes? I think you pretty much explained the latter part, or actually both of those, right?
Well, the cost is for the space itself. So right now we're working with a contractor. He's on short notice with us. So there's an interment fee that's attached to that. So that's an additional $1,600. Um, we like to be really upfront with that because it's not something we collect at the time. So when you reserve a space, we don't do anything with that. $1,600 is just, it's listed on the contract as something that may be coming down the road. He does a fantastic job for us. He does a lot of work. I always hesitate to say this, but I mean, my goal is to get equipment and have somebody on staff that can do that in the future. And if that were to be the case, that fee would be greatly reduced. So that's one of the reasons we don't collect that ahead of time. We've only been open for about 20 months. So
Right.
those are the only two fees we have, the space and the opening and closing or interment fee. If you want a memorial stone, that's an additional $500. It's not mandatory. So yeah, those are the
Well,
those are
that,
and
that
that's all
that's
on
a,
the website too.
yeah, all of that information is on the website, and
Yeah.
maybe we'll get you to type in the website in the chat when you get a
Yeah.
chance to.
Ryan, can you do that?
Um, then there's another question here, land use
Oh, Ryan, you can
change
do this
in
one.
future easement for perpetuity.
Yeah, I can take that one. So the way it works in Virginia is that once a parcel of land is declared a cemetery, it is always a cemetery and can never be redeveloped. And Panorama Natural Burial, just like almost every cemetery in the state, is fully licensed by the state. So the cemetery grounds, which is 20 acres, can never be redeveloped. And every year, well, so 10% of all sales are set aside into a perpetual care fund that the state audits every year. And should somehow the business fold or something happen to the property or whatever, the state has the mandate to ensure care for the property going into the future. So even if none of us end up working there, decades from now, uh, and no one else is either, the state has to maintain constant access and cleanliness to the area. So there's no danger of the graves being swallowed up by the woods or anything. They will always be taken care of.
Yeah, once a
That's-
cemetery, always a
that's-
cemetery in Virginia.
Okay, that's really interesting, actually, and a really good question. Um, so this question is not to be morbid, but maybe start at the beginning and like, what does the whole process look like from start to finish?
So everybody's process is a little different. I get this question a lot. I've actually had a few people ask me for like, oh, do you have like a decision tree or, and it's so individualized. Everybody's so different that it really
How
just
you
depends.
buy a plot?
Um, it really just depends. Depends on where the person dies, whether they're at home or at the hospital. Unfortunately, which hospital that takes place at. You're allowed to take somebody from the hospital home with you. Unfortunately, Martha Jefferson, which is kind of far from probably a lot of you guys, they don't allow for that. You can have a funeral home come sign you out. But you can have a home funeral. You can bring someone home. You can wash them. You can sit with them. You can invite people into your home. You can work with the funeral home. You can have them pick somebody up from the home or the hospital, have them washed at the funeral home. Like I said, there are a couple funeral homes that I know of that are happy to have the family come participate in washing at the funeral home. So that's an option too. Ultimately, either the family or the funeral home will bring the person to Panorama at the time that we've all designated, and then we'll have a service. So, I mean, the service is very much tailored to what feels right for the family. We don't have a template at Panorama. We've had a really wide range of participation. We've had some families arrive early. We get there 2 hours early and we decorate, we cut flowers and greenery and we decorate the gravesite. Some families have arrived early and really curated a pretty amazing space because that's what felt right to them. And then I've had other families drive from 2 hours away and say a couple words and turn around and drive 2 hours home. So
Yeah,
um,
very individual.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, if there are questions, I mean, I always tell people we're more than happy to talk you through anything, even if you're working, you're doing something totally different. Because it is so unusual, I think, for us as a society to talk about this stuff. We recognize, it can be really confusing. So, I mean, if you guys have questions, you're more than welcome to email or call me. There isn't an obligation to like work with us specifically. We're just hoping people make decisions that they're happy with. So I don't know if that answered the question about the process. I mean, it's just so unique to every family.
Yeah. Yes, it definitely it sounds like there's just not a one size fits all. So appreciate that answer. You did talk about the who's digging the graves, but there's a second part to this question, which is actually quite interesting. If there is no tombstone, for example, how to track who is where, etc.
We actually do have memorial stones. Oh yeah, so if there isn't, yeah, so
Yeah,
every grave site goes into our software as a record, and that is has GPS coordinates. And there are instructions on how to search the cemetery using your phone or tablet on the kiosk at the parking area. So when you pull in, you should be able to pull, if you have a smartphone or a tablet, a lot of us do at this point. It's just a couple of quick steps. You plug in the cemetery, you plug in the name, and then that website will use your GPS, your device's GPS, to get you within a few feet of the gravesite. So it's worked pretty well so far with people that I would say didn't necessarily, myself included, don't identify as the most tech savvy. So yeah, that's how we do it.
Um, their next two questions are kind of related. So I guess going back to, let's say there's some time in between death and the natural burial. Where is the body in the meantime? Is it at the funeral home typically, or where?
Again, it depends. You are welcome to keep someone at home, um, or have somebody at the funeral home.
Yeah,
There's no real, yeah, it doesn't have to be anywhere specific. I've had a few families wanting a quick-ish turnaround, and they've been able to get the green light from the hospital. We're just going to keep somebody cool at the hospital, and the funeral home will bring them um, from the hospital to, I mean, that hasn't happened. It's been kind of a hypothetical, but that should be fine too. Usually have a few days before things get difficult. But again, everybody's body is very different. So
okay. The question, a general question, from Tony, can you be buried on your own land naturally?
yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Every county has, or every
Wow.
Virginia is different. Every like individual city slash county, depending on like Charlottesville, it's its own thing. Um, yes, you definitely can. It has been tricky. We were trying to come up with a guide for families. It's been really hard to kind of get a straight answer from several counties. I think that's because people don't really ask. And so the people that are supposed to know don't know. But you need to be a certain distance. Typically, you need to be a certain distance from running water, have a certain number of acres, and then also be X amount of miles from a major city or something like that. But yeah, you can definitely do it. It's just a matter of finding out exactly
I,
what
yeah, I
what would
think
be
that
able.
that is something that I think is maybe surprising to a lot of people. I think people don't realize that. That's
Yeah.
very interesting. Yeah.
It's nice. It's nice for people. I would say it's nice for people that know the property is going to stay in the family. I think I've had several phone calls with different families talking about this. I think sometimes it could be problematic in terms of resale. Some people aren't going to want a cemetery on their property, so it could, if you're planning to sell the property, it could be a problem. But yeah, it really just depends. But I think it is a really great option for a lot of people around here that have farmland and intend to keep it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So the next two questions are sort of related about your collaborating with funeral homes. Um, and I'm not going to ask you to say these out loud, but do you find that there are recommended funeral homes that people should work with if they're interested in this type of burial?
Um, it's interesting because we'll work with anybody, right? When
Yeah.
we first opened, I reached out to every funeral home within like I don't know, like a 100-mile radius just to let them know that we were opening. And it's been interesting. Several of them have not responded, and I think that might be a byproduct of them just hoping green burial is going to go away, which it's not. So we have funeral homes that we've worked with more than others that I typically recommend or don't, kind of given my experience or our experience with them. We've got one in particular that's done a lot with us. With their director. Their director was at one of the funeral homes downtown and then moved to a different one. So she's been really great. But yeah, we're more than happy to work with anybody that would, yeah,
Mhm.
wanna do a burial.
This question is kind of really, well, first of all, it's thank you so much for talking about this. Nobody ever talks about what actually happens. And unless you've been part of the process, you really have no idea. And I think I'm just going to sort of say this raises such an important issue. And at Aging Together, we have been trying to partner with different organizations such as Panorama and also hospice, different hospice organizations. We had a wonderful um, film that we did in discussion a few weeks ago with Panorama and hospice. But it is really important to have these conversations because the last thing you want to be doing is sort of thinking about this stuff for the first time when you have a loved one that maybe has recently died because you're already going to be so emotional and under so much stress. The last thing you want to be doing is having to think about decisions that, perhaps you hadn't thought of previously. So it's so important. And also, for the person who has died to sort of let people know what it is, what their wishes are. And again, otherwise it's a guessing game after they're gone. So it's really, really important to have these conversations. Um, there's a question about the biodegradable caskets, and that ties into something that I saw earlier on this thread. Is the biodegradable casket, is that included in the fee? And do most funeral homes actually have those as well?
Ryan, you want to take this one?
Sure. So, casket may be the wrong term. You can actually be buried in anything biodegradable. So the three variations we typically see are a burial shroud, which could be any textile, so any natural textile, so cotton, linen, no polyester. We had someone ask about being buried in a sleeping bag, which probably is not going to be green. But a burial shroud is very simple. It could be a tablecloth or a blanket that someone really likes. The next option would be a woven basket, a wicker or bamboo basket, which are really light and great to work with. Not necessarily the most affordable things because someone has to physically weave that together, or an untreated wooden box, which I guess could be considered a casket, but they're not metal, they're not treated wood, they're meant to break down pretty quickly. So they're usually made out of pine or another softwood. Um, so we do not sell any of those. We only do the burials themselves. That those items are considered funeral home goods, and so by the state, we're not allowed to sell them. So you can get those from a funeral home. They will probably upcharge you a little bit because they have these things in stock. You can also, if you know the end is coming in advance, you can order them online, or if you or a friend is a woodworker, for example, you could build one of these yourself. And again, so long as they're up to green burial standards, which means no metal, no chemicals, it's good to go. But again, you are within your rights to source these from a friend or from the internet or from a funeral home as well. And pretty much every funeral home should have some or all of these options in stock.
Great. Okay. Um, is the cemetery in wooded area or fields at Panorama?
We actually have all of the above. So we are licensed for 20 acres, and of that 20 acres, something like 16 or 17 is field. It was a former cow pasture. So completely open, although we may plant a few trees in there to provide shade for visitors over time. And then we have other sections that are in the woods, although this is not deep canopy woods. This is scattered trees. And so you get dappled sunlight in there. And they're very nice wooded areas during the summer, especially when it's hot. But, we want to make sure we do the burials a certain distance away from trees so that we're not impacting the roots. So it is wooded, but don't expect permanent darkness in there.
Can families assist with lowering the body into the ground? That's the next question.
Yeah, it's actually it's not a requirement for people that don't have the ability or are totally uncomfortable, but it is something that we mention whenever we give a tour. We always ask for 4 to 6 able-bodied individuals to help us with lowering the person. We don't have a lowering device. We have had a few families that don't really have, they've got one person and don't have the ability to help us. We've been able to make it happen with a little help from the funeral home and our farm manager and a little bit of elbow grease. But yeah, that's our standard procedure. So.
This question says that from Carolyn, some graves allow 3 bodies to be stacked in one place. Is this true at Panorama?
Did you say 3 bodies in?
Yeah, it said I didn't know this. Some graves allow 3 bodies to be stacked in one place. Is this true at Panorama?
No, and with natural burial, bodies are, they're down about 3.5 to 4 feet. And that is because the organisms at that level are much more efficient at what they need to do as opposed to like 6 feet under, like the TV show. So no, one person per space. But we do, Ryan, if you want to talk a little bit about this, we do offer recycling in 75 years.
Yeah, the idea there is that in a traditional cemetery, you have to expand until you're out of room, because every single new person needs a new grave spot. For us and for a lot of green cemeteries, we offer recycling. So it's not mandatory and there's no price difference if you choose to recycle or not. But what happens there is that after 75 years in the Virginia red clay, which is pretty acidic, there shouldn't be any remains left. And so we can put another person into the same piece of earth and let them break down there. And that way we don't have to continuously expand outwards and keep adding more and more sections. 75 years is an arbitrary number, but that's roughly 3 generations visitation rights. And if you do have a headstone, if you have one of the memorial headstones, we'll pick it up and put it into a memorial rock wall. So it's not like there won't be any record of someone having been there. It's just that it allows us to reuse the space for someone else.
Is there an indoor place for the service in case of inclement weather?
We do have a barn, and we actually just had our first official, like real serious use of it during a service. We had a really large crowd, and it was one of those days that was like sleet and freezing rain and snow. Um, Typically, I mean, there's no fee to use it either. We always tell people, we start our tours in the barn to kind of show people that it's available for whatever they'd like to do with it before, during, after. Plenty of people don't use it. Some people have kind of used it to shelter from a little bit of rain. We had another family bring coffee and bagels for after a service, and they hung up a bunch of t-shirts because he was a t-shirt collector, I guess. But we can also use it, as we did a few weeks ago, for the service. So the funeral home brought the woman in the box to the barn, and family and friends gathered. There's probably, I don't know, Ryan, 80 to 100 people, and did everything, under the new roof in the barn. I will say there are holes in some of the walls, so you have to kind of be careful where you're standing. But then we moved her from the barn over to the cemetery section. So we took her along the road, and then only the closest friends and family came to actually lower her into the ground, because it was a little slippery out there. So we were trying to keep people safe too.
Right. Here's a question. Do you work with genealogy platforms? And I don't know if the person wants to elaborate on that question or,
So I
okay, we'll
mean,
come, yeah, go
yeah,
ahead,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, I mean, anything, the most useful
Oh, like for
platform.
tracking people's location. I think that's
Yeah,
what
well, I
they,
was gonna say the most
yeah.
useful platform that I've ever seen is Find a Grave, and that's all volunteer entry. So anybody is welcome to come. And I don't think that Panorama has a Find a Grave presence yet, but we only have 31 or 32 burials, so that could change very quickly. So essentially what it is you take a photo and you submit it. And Find a Grave is connected to ancestry.com. So yeah, I mean, that's fine with us. It just isn't something that we've been able to do, but typically it's not the cemetery doing it. It's usually just individual volunteers.
Okay. We have a question. What is the size of the plot?
Plots are 4 by 8, so pretty standard issue for a cemetery.
Okay. Um, so here's another one. I'm not able to see the whole thing. Something's blocking this. As a body composts the grave, depresses, do you add more soil on top?
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. So when we do the burial, as Stephanie said, we bury at about 3.5 or 4 feet deep. And then there's extra soil from the excavation for the grave. And so we actually mound that on top. So if you come visit us, you'll see a bunch of mounds that are, well, shortly after the burial for the first day or two, they're usually 2.5 feet tall. Within a week, they settle pretty quickly down to 1 to 2 feet, and then over the following months and years they settle even more. But the idea there is if you do a natural burial and resurface the soil to ground level, it will settle and create a sinkhole. So we, instead of that, build a mound on top, and with the expectation being that that will settle down into the ground. And as part of that, we encourage friends and family to do plantings of native plants on top of the graves, and those will help stabilize the soil. They'll also provide beautification and let people stay connected to the gravesite. But essentially, we build mounds with the expectation being that they will settle back to roughly ground level over time.
Great. Great. There was a question about the transcript. We have recorded this program today, so that will be available on Aging Together's website in a few days. And I just want to thank everybody so much for their participation. We would like to send out a very, very brief survey, just a couple of questions that we'd like to send out after this program, just to kind of get a sense of, was this kind of what you were expecting? Did you find the presentation informative and useful? Would you recommend it? You know, maybe 2 or 3 questions that we're going to send out, probably again in a day or two, but we really encourage you to take a minute to let us know, to fill out that survey. Just really helps us with programming and getting a sense of, you know, are these of topics of interest, and you know, if you are getting the information that you hope you were getting. I'll just, before we sort of finish up, I'll just give everybody one more chance to either, you know, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask a question, or type a question in the chat. A lot of people saying this was incredible. Thank you so much. Great information. I just think, you know, it it's it, it's an area that we don't talk about, as we were saying earlier. And I think the idea of natural burial is something that a lot of people really don't know anything about, myself included. I really didn't until Ryan connected me to Stephanie and you guys, and it's just really fascinating. Um, Judy shares that her brother was buried this way near Austin, Texas, and that you covered this all so well. So everyone is very grateful for the opportunity. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Anna, anything you can think of that I forgot to mention?
No, that was wonderful. Great job, and thanks for a great presentation.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank you for
much.
having us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy the balmy weather today. Hope you can all get out in the sunshine. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care now.